Hello, everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required. My name, as always, is Aaron.
And my name is Zach.
And before we get into our topic, because we're actually doing something a little different this time, we are going to fully bypass our intro topic because it feels like there's a lot to dig into with our main topic, which is gambling in the video game space as it pertains to a couple of recent issues. But before we dive headlong into that, I just wanted to quickly say thank you to all of our returning listeners. And thank you just as much, if not more, to all of our new listeners. Feel free to give us a like, give us a follow on your podcatcher of choice. We've started posting YouTube videos, so if you'd like to leave us a comment or subscribe to that channel, feel free to do so. And the most important thing you can do for us is share the show with a friend if you think they'd like it. That is our only way of growing, and we really appreciate it whenever anyone does that. So thank you. You are a rock star.
I agree. I definitely agree. And without further ado, like we said, we're going right into it. We're talking about gambling today, specifically starting with the fact that there's been a lot of gambling related news / drama / issues when it comes to Twitch. And we're not here to talk so much on the drama, which is kind of surprising. I am definitely a gossip.
No, I figure, hey, someone's life is their life. If there's criminal activity involved, maybe it's better for other people to know about it. That's a hint. But generally speaking, I'm not into like celebrity drama, even in like the streaming space. That's not our steez.
Was that a cheeky nudge in relation to a certain portion of this topic?
I'll never tell.
Oh, you'll never tell. Oh, well.
Until like 2 minutes from now when we talk about it in depth.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I guess for some context here, on both Aaron and I, is that neither of us are, I think, avid Twitch watchers. I watch a lot of YouTube, and by extension, some of the streams that happen on YouTube. But when it comes to Twitch, not as much my thing. That being said, Aaron, what is your background with the platform, since we're about to kind of talk about it a little bit?
Very, very minimal, I would say. Probably comfortably, maybe even less than yours. I rarely watch streams as they're happening unless they involve someone, like some figure that I'm super invested in, or it's an announcement, or it's like an E3 live stream or something like that. In which case, I'd probably watch it on YouTube before I'd watch it on Twitch, just because Twitch being, streaming first, it doesn't line up with the way I tend to consume content. So I just haven't really played around with it that much. So I haven't gotten very invested in it, its community, its creators, or, its whole like ecosystem. I'm much more familiar with YouTube, generally speaking.
Yeah. No, I definitely say much more of a YouTube fanboy on my side. But all of that aside, the reason I just kind of bring that up is if Aaron and I seem a little aloof with some of the things that are Twitch related, that's probably why.
Perhaps not aloof, but a little clueless, a little bit, fart brained, if you will, on my part. But yeah, that's kind of like a good erudite term to just drop, right? Fart brained.
Yeah. I think that's the medical condition that it's known as. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I could translate it to Latin, but I don't have the time. And the other thing I'll say is, like, I promise you, if I tried to pronounce the name of most streamers that we talk about during this portion, I will get them wrong. So I'm sorry about that. Call me an idiot. It's fine. I already know. But they're unparsable. But anyhow, before we belabor that kind of disclaimer bit for too long, Zach, would you mind cluing me into how we kind of landed on this as a topic? Like, what was the inciting incident?
Yeah, I mean, it was watching, as always, Bellular News, doing some scanning around, and finding. Well, I'd actually seen a video earlier talking about some of the drama around Twitch and gambling. And for those that don't know, we kind of, I think, explained it a little bit, but Twitch is a video streaming platform that specifically targets like the gaming niche. So it's people, playing video games, and you can watch them, all that kind of stuff, right? But they were talking about some of the issues with Twitch. And one of the big things lately has been there's a lot of creators on the platform that are not thrilled about the fact that there is straight up gambling streams through some unverified, kind of questionable slot websites. And that's kind of caused a big hoopla lately on the platform. And so ultimately, that's kind of what we're here to talk about, Aaron and I, is, just to start off, is Twitch really the place for this kind of content in general? There's some drama that's behind it a little bit that Aaron and I hinted to, but just kind of at a larger level, is it okay that a platform where you only have to be 13 plus to make an account can serve people straight up gambling content? Just for a disclaimer as well, like I think in Las Vegas, Aaron, I don't know if you know this or if you've been to Vegas, but is it 18? You have to be 18 plus to even step onto the casino floor. Like there's like parts of the casino you can walk through that go through the slots, but you're not allowed to step off the carpet. I think it's if you're under 18, you can't. Do you know off the top of your head? I can Google it.
I do not know off the top of my head, but 18, it's either 18 or 21.
Yeah,
I'm actually doing some surreptitious Googling.
Yeah. I think it's probably 18, I would think. But anyway, my point being, like, everywhere where there's regulated gambling, like, really don't want kids there.
21 and over.
Yeah. And then just to, get this number out of the way, apparently in August, Aaron, there were 51 million hours of slots streamed on Twitch. 51
That's like a lot of fucking
million.
hours.
Yeah. So, I kind of ran through some of this. I know you've done some research. I'm curious to see like, what are your general takeaways as really an outsider kind of to the space? Like, what is your immediate thought process here?
In terms of how gambling interacts with Twitch or on gambling in general?
Well, specifically gambling on Twitch with this story.
Yeah. The way I figure it, it's really hard to make like a full moral call on something like this, which has so many nuances to it, because gambling itself is like a lot of, I mean, you might as well consider it a controlled substance, where there's always risk of it falling into the hands of someone at risk for addiction, but it shouldn't necessarily be made fully illegal. That having been said, I think considering, finding out that, you need to be 21 for sure to actually gamble in Vegas. I'm not sure if it's 18 just to step on the floor or not, but 13 is comfortably below that. You're in a very impressionable time, and having that kind of content, drip fed to you, and it's being played with real money for real stakes at a tender age of 13 can be kind of exceptionally destructive. And you don't need to be 13 for it to be destructive, right? There are people who have struggled with gambling addiction all their lives, and being exposed to actual like on-air gambling could be not good. It also kind of stretches, in my personal opinion, the idea of like, what is actually watchable content? Like, what is content for a video game focused streaming thing? Because, I remember seeing on TVs every now and again, like a world tournament of poker match or something. I distinctly remember one where Meatloaf was playing, and it was the first time I'd ever heard of Meatloaf. And I think I laughed for 45 minutes because someone decided that their badass name was going to be Meatloaf. But that's completely beside the point. No, I think considering Twitch's target demographic and the type of people that tend to consume the most content on those, like on the actual platform, I think if not fully banned, it has to be severely regulated, because it really can, especially when a lot of the content can be, as we're going to get into in a little bit, very misleading in terms of its presentation, of what your odds are. It can be enormously destructive, and young people who do not have any concept of the actual real world value of real world money may end up falling into something that they and their parents will have to carry with them for a good long while, all because a bunch of people wanted to play digital slots on an uncertified website
Yeah.
for millions of people to watch. How many hours again?
Is 51 million hours, and keep in mind that was just in August.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot of content. That's a lot of content.
Well, the question. Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No, just saying, it's a lot of content for people to watch,
I think,
and a lot of time for it to really seep into your brain that like this is cool, this is fine, and it's something that I could do and I can win just that easily.
yeah. Well, I think to hit on your note of the controlled substance, right? Well, expand on it really, is we're not even considering the component of the kind of stardom that YouTubers and Twitch streamers have, and kind of the weird parasocial relationship that you develop with these people. So if they're, doing gambling and you think they're cool, right? You're an impressionable kid. You're watching them gamble, you're watching them do all this stuff, and you think that's cool. You're more likely to then develop those habits and potentially become a problem gambler. Now, I think some of that, just kind of based on my understanding, is kind of genetic or psychological. It's not really just something where it's like, I've watched gambling content. I am not at all interested in gambling personally. It doesn't interest me. I don't find it that fun. But you're kind of predisposing a ton of people to a very problematic hobby for some specific people, and there's no way of really like filtering out the problematic gamblers. It's really just everybody gets sucked into the same funnel, and some people will be able to come out of that okay, and then some people will get really negatively impacted by that content.
It's not too different from like there isn't a breathalyzer test for buying alcohol.
Yeah.
Because just by sight, unless someone is visibly inebriated, the proprietor of a liquor store or a bodega or something isn't going to be able to, in any legal way, weed out the problem drinkers, so yeah, no, I mean, like, it's interesting and it's hairy. I also think one of the things that I want to kind of get out in front of, and the more I research this, the more I realize that you could make a false equivalency argument in this direction, is its relationship to, like, making impressions with violence versus gambling, right? It's really easy to fall into the thought process that we're talking in the sense that just because an impressionable youth consumes a certain type of content, they're likely to replicate it. I don't think that argument actually holds, because I don't think if a 13-year-old goes over to their friend's house and their friend has an older sibling who has Doom on their system, and then they spend a couple hours viewing content that maybe their parents wouldn't like them to, I don't think they're any more likely to go and tear someone in half from the top, or become a chainsaw murderer.
Huh?
I don't think that's the case at all. So obviously, we're talking about different things. We are talking a lot about psychology in this sense, a lot about addictive behavior, and I don't think it's easy to make a false equivalency there, but I don't think the two are actually correlated in any particularly strong way. But
you're watching someone actually gamble too. Like the difference is there's been a ton of research on like watching violent video games. People are able to differentiate between a video game and actual violence. And so what's really been found is that there's really no serious impact in terms of like what's it? I'm blanking on the word. But anyway, my point being, you're actually watching people gamble. Like these Twitch streamers are actually gambling. they're
I
actually doing the thing.
It's totally true, and that's something I may have actually hit on. I actually wrote a research paper a good number of years ago, examining claims of violence in video games impacting youth in a tangible, like measurable way. And there's basically no correlation. It's just really easy to spook people with that. So that's not what I'm just saying. That's not what we're trying to do, because like you said, there is a stark line between pure fiction where you're fighting hell demons that invade Mars and literally watching someone gamble and tell you how easy it is to win big money doing it.
Yeah.
Which is demonstrably false in terms of everything to do with gambling. Unless you are a master card counter, you do not have a proven system. You have a proven method for getting better results most of the time, but it's not like glitching, like a speed run glitch that lets you get through the entirety of Super Mario World in 0.2 seconds. It's not like that. And there's a clear line between those two things. So, yeah.
Well, you know what they say, the house always wins, right? Like that's literally
exactly
the thing. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and so I mean, I guess to like dive into some of the Twitch stuff a little bit deeper, we found this story, which is obviously a pretty big one, a little while back, and then we'll talk about the more recent one as well. But the was it Pro Syndicate and Timartin?
Yeah, Pro Syndicate and T Martin. But of course, so the clarification here though is that this did not happen. This was not a Twitch thing. So this was this was at large. These are YouTubers. But yes.
Yeah. Sorry, again, this is betraying my complete lack of knowledge about like I don't normally watch like dude bro streamers, but regardless, the gist of this in terms of like why this sort of content can become legitimately dangerous, whereas a 14-year-old playing Call of Duty may not be. These two, I guess not. I mean, maybe they are affiliated. I don't know. YouTubers started posting a bunch of content trading CS:GO skins and gambling on CS:GO skins. And if you recall from a good while back, they that whole thing turned into a huge debacle because people were spending a bunch of money on completely unregulated gambling sites, trading skins and gambling on them using things like slots and roulette and poker and shit like that. And they framed all of their videos around not having any idea what those sites were before they decided to do the video, and B, how easy it was to succeed in a huge way on those sites with no repercussions to themselves. Zach, would you mind telling me what happened not too long after that?
Well, I mean, basically the TLDR after that is somebody figured out that both Pro Syndicate and T Martin had affiliations with CS:GO Lotto. They were the VP and president. I don't remember which one was which, but basically they were full owners of this site. And so they were just not disclosing that information at all, which is incredibly, if not illegal, unethical. And it just became this huge debacle. And I know that T Martin had to make this whole apology thing. I actually looked him up recently, and he still has a YouTube. So this stuff happened like 6 years ago to those that weren't plugged in. But he still apparently is doing well with 4 million subscribers. So I guess it didn't impact him too much. But their YouTube channel's 100% targeted kids. And so it blew up into this whole thing when people found out. And, I think reasonably so, these two YouTubers got dragged over the fire for basically, promoting gambling to children. And also for those
under false pretenses.
Yeah. Under false pretenses. And also for those that may not know, and they're like, well, how are you actually making money if it's a video game and blah, 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 blah. The way it works is that some Steam games, you can actually earn cosmetic skins and then sell those skins to other users. So what CS:GO Lotto did is it was people putting up their skins and gambling with them so they could win other skins that then they could sell. So it was a really convoluted loop of using cosmetic game items that then you could sell for real world money. So it was literally gambling. Like there was a way out to get actual USD or whatever currency you're using.
Yeah, which is like obviously not good. And then the more recent inciting incident is obviously the one on Twitch with the streamer whose name I just cannot possibly remember, um, who ended up taking a couple $100,000 under false pretenses from various different people to fund a gambling habit, which kind of ignited the whole like worldwide conversation around gambling content on Twitch.
Yeah, it was Slicker, something like that. Yeah, I don't watch this person. I just watched a video about the person. But yeah,
Yeah.
$200,000 he borrowed under false pretenses from both fans and other Twitch streamers. I think he was saying, if I'm not mistaken, that he like needed financial help. Um, he labeled it as like a life crisis, not as like a gambling related thing.
Yeah. My understanding of it was that he said he needed to pay off some debts, which may have been a component of the truth, but regardless, it was to fuel a a gambling addiction rather, that I believe he even attributed to having kind of started to form by gambling on CS:GO skins.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
which is a fascinating kind of tie-in, and obviously we're not here to shame someone going through like an addiction crisis. Obviously, Zach, like you wouldn't do that, but I mean, it's pretty hard to say it's not shitty when you steal $300,000 from people and lie to them about why you took it. So the point being that there's this whole like convoluted knot of of different interrelated issues that kind of all point to gambling content generally not being super beneficial to basically anybody except for either the lucky few who win big or the house.
Yeah. And I think the final thing on the note of like the T Martin and Pro Syndicate thing is there were situations, so the way that gambling exists on Twitch now, and this is changing, and this is kind of the last component of the Twitch thing before we expand out, but the last component of the Twitch thing is that the way it used to work is there was a slots category, and you could do all of these unregulated sites or play on all these unregulated sites, and people would go to those sites with, hundreds of thousands of viewers or just thousands of viewers, whatever it was, right? And they would get money to spend on slots on this site. And they would make it seem like, oh, this is my hard-earned money. Keep in mind, the house always wins. They would disclose that. But it's just the idea that, they're winning big, but they're winning big with house money. So they're not actually betting their own money on any of this or losing their own money. Places are asking for them to sponsor episode or streams or whatever, and then they're going on there gambling with house money, so it doesn't matter if they win or lose. They're not getting impacted at all. And this all turned into a big thing because partially of the whole Slicker situation and some other stuff with Twitch streamers really calling out to Twitch to stop this. But Twitch is actually, I actually have the quote, and this is kind of like I said, the last important thing, but they're making a policy update this month on the 18th to prohibit streaming of gambling sites that include slots, roulette, dice games, and other things that aren't licensed either in the U.S. or other jurisdictions that provide sufficient consumer protections. And then they said they will continue to allow websites that focus on sports betting, fantasy sports, and poker. So they are pushing out some protections for people. But here's the big question for you, in my opinion, Aaron. And then I'll state my thing. And this is kind of my last part with the Twitch. Is that enough? And is that really even beneficial for stopping the issue at hand? Because there's still betting. There's still sports betting. There's still fantasy sports betting. And there's still poker allowed.
Yeah. I run into this kind of like this moral quandary with this situation where, again, like any given controlled substance, I actually, without going full libertarian on the perspective, I do not think that the prohibition method of controlling anything that is potentially destructive necessarily always works, right? It clearly didn't work with alcohol during Prohibition. It clearly didn't work with gambling when there have been various different attempts to ban gambling. And it doesn't work with a lot of things. So, if you take it off of this site, it will pop up somewhere else. That having been said, a site with the reach that Twitch has should be doing everything it can to keep potentially harmful, content away from especially children. So I think this is probably a good first step towards self-regulation, because, some of this content is going to pop up on bad other shitty websites because those bad shitty other websites always exist and always will. But I don't think it. Honestly, I think it's probably not enough. I think if you're going to allow some gambling but not all gambling, I would need to see the rationale behind why certain types of gambling are allowed to be streamed and certain types aren't. Because you still have that reach. You still have that enormous viewership that is going to tune into certain stuff like this and may still glean the exact same negative behavior patterns from it and then replicate them. It's probably better to just mitigate it on a much more aggressive level. But I don't know, maybe part of me wonders if Twitch is worried about losing, ad revenue or sponsorships or stuff like that, which is why they're allowing some of these higher profile things. And at least it's good that they're doing it. Like, they're trying to say that it has to be done through regulated sites, like through actually certified gambling sites, not, fly by night. I started this with a hedge fund so I could make 30 million in a couple of weeks and then bounce sort of sites. But no, I mean, I think they probably could have come down on a little bit harsher. But honestly, I just straight up do not have the statistics to tell you whether or not this is going to have any like demonstrable impact on, curtailing what they're trying to curtail.
Yeah. Well, I think my position on it is, first of all, I'm not here to even crap on gambling. I have friends that like to gamble. I do not constantly tell. I'm not like the person that's like, did you know smoking's bad for you? It's like, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't know smoking's bad. I'm not one of those people. So I don't care about gambling. It is problematic. It is a thing that can cause people a lot of pain, a lot of issues. I understand that. My main issue is that kids are one of the main targets of Twitch, and Twitch just does not have sufficient protections in place, in my opinion, to protect kids from that content. It's interesting you brought up the sponsor thing too. So I've been doing some digging. It seems like a lot of sponsors and advertisements do not want to be associated with gambling content. Do not want to be associated. So actually, Twitch's move to protect gambling is probably more of a thing because they know that it's a big category of what people are watching, and they want to maintain those eyes, that revenue. Kind of similarly, this really harkens to kind of the whole hot tub streamer thing and a lot of the control or, weirdness around how girls can or can't dress on Twitch. I'm not going to dig into that can of worms, but I will say that I think if Twitch had a more adult-centered platform or part of the website, they should totally do that. And then they can put gambling on that. They can let people produce certain kinds of content that are maybe a little bit more adult focused, something like that. I think that really my issue is around the fact that kids go onto this platform to watch people play video games, and then they find all this other stuff that parents probably just don't really want them to watch. There is a little bit of that with YouTube, I feel like, as well, but I feel like YouTube is much more like, it's a lot more PG the way it initially kind of presents itself to you, I think. Twitch just like shoots gambling and like hot tub streamers to the front of the page first time you're there. And so I just think some kind of segmentation between the two could be a good idea. I don't have an issue, honestly, with either of those existing on Twitch. I just don't think that there's good enough protections. And I think the last thing I would say is that if we're really trying to help consumers, and we'll probably dig into this a little bit when we talk about loot boxes, but Britain has a massive issue with sports gambling. Absolutely
Oh, yeah.
massive issue. It's ruining lives, causing a ton of issues. So it's just kind of, I look at the fact that they're allowing that still, and I'm like,
Yeah. It's
eh.
well, it's to me and this will be my final point on like the streaming side of it. It reminds me of all of those lawsuits many years ago, around the time that people started realizing that smoking was really fucking bad for you.
Yeah.
And people were like, oh, well, the fun Camel, or drinking as well, like, they ditched a lot of like the fun family friendly mascots for beer companies or liquor companies or cigarettes and stuff like that, because it was determined that what they were ultimately doing was aiming at a younger demographic. And even though that demographic couldn't necessarily purchase the goods, it was ingrained in their head that it was, a fun, friendly, cool thing to do. It was a thing that they may carry with them for as long as they need to in order to, purchase those goods. Basically they were marketing to kids without explicitly marketing to kids. And with this, the nature of advertisement has changed. It's much more along the lines of native advertising, right? So when you're doing a stream of playing digital slots, or you're doing a stream of yourself trying to gamble on CS:GO skins or some shit, what you're doing is essentially advertising the concept of gambling, but without any of the restrictions applied to advertisements, generally speaking, because it's not an overt advertisement, but it is subliminal messaging. It is content aimed at a demographic that should not be accessing that content. At which point I feel like it's probably important to say that I know how easy it is to get around age restrictions. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't done it myself in my youth. It takes like 15 clicks to set up a whole new email address where you're 27.
Yeah.
It's and you're actually like 12. It's very easy to get around that, but it's at least like something. It's some sort of gateway between the young impressionable audience, like you said, and the content like a hot tub stream, which I don't think is the most salacious thing that's ever gone up on like general viewing audience stuff.
Yeah.
But it's very clearly meant to be provocative, and it may not be appropriate for an 8-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean,
so-
but at the same time, an 8-year-old's going to look at that and be like, and not really get it, probably. At the same,
Yeah.
So let me make a stipulation. This is a hot take, I know, for some people. I think that hot tub streamers and just women showing a lot of skin on Twitch is a much smaller issue than gambling. I think gambling's
that's
a
not a hot
bigger
take to me.
issue. Yeah, because
I think the hot tub
who cares
streaming
if you
is
see
like
some boobs?
everyone has a body. Let's just let that go. Like if someone wants to use their physicality to market their own stuff and it's their decision, then I say more power to them.
Exactly.
At that point, it's up to parents to say like, hey, I don't feel comfortable with my child consuming this content. But no, I think the gambling thing is completely different, because I don't think there's necessarily an addiction risk where you're going to be spending an absolute crap ton of money from watching a prominent female streamer in a hot tub. It may not be what you want your children to see.
Well, you might start simping, but
I mean, true, but but no. I would agree. Like I think the gambling content would be a much more serious issue, generally speaking, like widespread, serious, consequence-based issue than seeing some boobs. Like,
yeah. Well, especially when you frame it through like a video game that a lot of kids are playing, right? And this is actually my last thing, so don't let me make another point after this. But I'm gonna expand. I'm gonna expand on your thing. And here's another big point. No kids are looking up gambling, and if there are, it's a minority, right? So it's not like you mentioned the whole prohibition thing earlier of like people will find the content. Adults will find the content, and I think that's completely fine. You're an adult. Your brain is done developing. Go find your gambling content. I don't give a shit. You're a man, or you're a grown-ass man, woman, NB, it doesn't matter. Kids aren't looking that content up. So if it's just on the Twitch homepage, you're literally subjecting them to content that they otherwise probably wouldn't find.
Exactly.
And that's my main issue, right? Like if
Yep.
gambling was something that kids were just going to look up, like let's be honest, boobs or like nude women or nude men or whatever, right?
Pictures
Then
of various animated characters and doing lewd acts.
yeah, I mean they're just going to do that's part of growing up, right? Like that's just going to happen. So it's dumb to and it's not bad. It's not nearly as bad as what people put it out to be. So that's my kind of like final note to hopefully strengthen your point. And kind of talk about why maybe Twitch isn't the right platform is you're kind of making people find this content that otherwise wouldn't have any interest at all. And it's potentially problematic content. So, yeah.
No, I mean, I think you summed that up very well. I would say, like, I get the appeal. If I was running some sort of gambling operation, I would want my content to be on Twitch because it's going to get a larger audience than gambling.us or whatever the fuck, like some other site that's not going to get nearly as much traffic as gambling. And if I can get a high profile influencer to promote my site, my content, as a business brained person, that would make sense. But that having been said, if fucking cigarette companies could have sold cigarettes to kids, they would have doubled their revenue. And they probably wouldn't have balked at it until someone else did, which is more or less exactly what happened. So you're completely right. You're spot on with that analysis, and I have no follow-up.
Well, I think that the easiest transition here is, why might there be so much gambling on Twitch, which is, a game-centric website? Well, some people would argue, I'm not necessarily making this connection, but some people do make this argument, that part of it is because certain things in video games are gambling and make people predisposed to be interested in that kind of content. Aaron, what do you think I'm talking about? It's
Loot
two
boxes.
words. Yeah. Loot boxes, or as EA likes to refer to them, surprise mechanics. So
surprise mechanics.
Surprise mechanics. So yeah, loot boxes. We're gonna talk a little bit more about loot boxes. But I think in some ways from a different perspective than we normally do. So we talked a little bit about it. The UK was supposed to hopefully put in some protections. They really haven't. Some other European Union countries have realized that loot boxes are gambling and have put protections in place. But, just for some background on why loot boxes are in fact gambling, there was a study by the University of Plymouth and Wolverhampton, and they found that 12 out of 13 studies on the topic of loot boxes and gambling showed unambiguous connections between problem gambling behavior and loot boxes. And then in addition to that, there's just a quote here that says, at-risk individuals such as problem gamblers. I think the fact they add gamers here is a little bit funny as an at-risk group, but okay. Gamers and young people make disproportionate contributions to loot box revenue. So, just some studies. You can do a lot more research than that if you want to find the specifics, but there's been a lot of work done internationally, and it's all found that loot boxes are problematic. So why aren't we doing anything? And at that point, I'm actually going to pass it over to you, Aaron, because I know that you did some digging like I did into why there's some stipulation there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the biggest one is just that, I mean, we can just call this a quiz to see how much Aaron remembers from what he was researching earlier.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're good. No, it's good. It's good. The general consensus is that based on the legal definition of gambling, which I did actually pull up, but have now lost, which is incredible. No, it is the legal definition of to gamble is to play games of chance for money. Or to bet, right? So the a little bit deeper into the legalese of that will lead you to understand that it is, always tangible items or actual currency that you are betting on. And in the case of digital goods, that does not technically apply.
Yeah. To expand on that, it's basically the idea that traditional loot or loot boxes, when I say loot, I mean virtual items, right? Like Aaron had mentioned, they're not seen as gambling because the prize so those virtual items cannot be said to be something of value.
Tangible value.
Well,
specifically.
Yeah, I guess
I think.
tangible value. But even then, I say bullshit to you, Aaron, because clearly the whole CS:GO Lotto situation that we mentioned earlier seems to spit in the face of that, because people are trading these items for tangible value in the form of, yeah, sure, some of the skins may only be like worth pennies or dollars or whatever, right? But they're still cashing out. And then on top of that, I did some additional digging because are you familiar with EVE Online at all, Aaron?
Yes, indeed I am.
All right. So EVE Online, for those that don't know, it's this MMO where you're in space, you build spaceships, blah, blah, blah. Some of the ships in that game are pretty expensive. I did some digging because this made me think of it. And one of the ships has a listed cost of $108. There's another ship that was over 1,000, but I couldn't pronounce the name, so I didn't put it on here. But one of the ships is worth $108, and that was as of 2010. And I think it was like 58 hours to make it or something. So the reason I bring this up is like clearly these virtual things have some kind of tangible value because people are willing to pay for them. At minimum, people pay for gold farmers and MMOs all the time.
Yeah, the issue is that the defenders of these practices are using the medium itself, being virtual, as kind of a roadblock to calling it like tangible value. But there's obviously tangible value to these things. It's one of the reasons NFTs don't make a goddamn lick of sense to me, is that they're nothing. they're encoded images that you purchase for an exorbitant amount of money and then hopefully sell for more. It's not technically gambling. It's not gambling at all, actually. It's just stupid. But
it's called a different thing.
There are two different definitions, but I think like that kind of thing can be exploitative in its own right. I'm not sure whether it falls under gambling. Because I mean, there's a lot of ties between the term gambling and games of choice.
Yeah.
Or games of chance rather, not choice, where, I think if you're going to follow that to its logical extreme, then the Loot Crate service, where you buy a monthly subscription and once a month you get a box of mystery items, is gambling-ish. It's a game of chance. You're paying a set sum for something that you do not know what it's going to be. You do not know what its value is going to be. But you're going to get something, and it is tangible. But I don't think anyone would call Loot Crate a gambling venture.
Yeah, it's a little bit like you know it when you see it kind of a thing. And I think the thing with Loot Crate, too, is that you only get I guess you could have multiple subscriptions, but that'd be a little bit weird to be like, I want these items.
Sure someone does it.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody does it. But in the case of, loot boxes at their extreme, you've got people spending thousands of dollars on it. I mean, I think the statistic here is that 5% of customers make up the majority of spenders, right? And they call them whales. I hate that name. It's so dehumanizing and awful. But
this is true.
That's apparently at spending roughly $100 a month on loot boxes. And there's people that spend way more than that. And the stipulation there is that, or not the stipulation, but the caveat there too, is that those people aren't wealthy. The data suggests that these aren't just like people that are rich and have the money. A lot of the time, they're just people that have trouble not spending money because they might have FOMO, because the game kind of manipulates them psychologically. We've talked about that a little bit on our episode talking about Blizzard's Diablo Immortal, all that kind of stuff. There's so many things that play into it. And
I mean, it's like the dialed up to 11 version of when you download an idle clicker game. Like I on a whim for no reason, it was 2 a.m. and I was loopy, and I downloaded this game about like making a restaurant, but it's an idle game, right? And the game itself is designed in such a way that if you want to progress at any sort of satisfying rate, they have like 3 different ways to integrate ads into it. And you're always just going to click on that ad. Because you want your project to get, bigger, faster, and, more successful more quickly. And that, like, extrapolate that to someone who may not have like a full grasp on what their money is worth, or is just so obsessed with it, or has an addictive personality where they can actually spend money by clicking that button. They say, well, I can do this much faster. I can just buy this ship and skip progression for X amount of time. And at that point, it starts to seem like exploitation. I'm not sure if I would call it full on gambling until it is randomized.
Yeah, I think by definition that's not gambling, because you know what you're there's a contract there, you know what you're getting. But to your point, it's the step that we've moved towards, because I think we've moved away from loot boxes. I think have generally kind of been seen as this really evil thing at this point. So I think we're kind of moving away from that. And so now we're just, games are trying to develop ways to make you get these purchases that you want. But what we also hit on, and I think you mentioned prior to the call, was with loot boxes at one time, they had the ability to change the probability on things. Like, even when they disclosed the probability, which is the one thing that I think people were regulated to do, is they had to disclose what probabilities were to get things, to illustrate, like, your chance of getting this is really low. We ended up learning that a lot of the time, those probabilities weren't even correct, because back-end algorithms were actually adjusting things differently. So there's no real transparency even.
Not great. No, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was actually looking into some research done, I want to say a couple of years ago, into like self-regulation in terms of gambling and whatnot. And there are a couple of countries, I want to say China is one of the harshest ones, that put like hefty restrictions and like things you need to comply to when you're going to release a game. It has to include a little icon, that indicates in-game purchases. It has to include a little icon that indicates, loot box, game of chance sort of things. But a lot of the time, those regulatory groups are extremely underfunded and do not have the ability to actually enforce even something as basic as signage, like an ESRB rating. It's more or less up to the developers to do that themselves.
Yeah.
And a lot of them wanted to, a couple of, regulatory groups encouraged or demanded that developers also publish, like, actually put frontage on the game's packaging, or, digital billboard or whatever, to indicate what the loot drop rates were, what is the probability, so that you know explicitly what you're getting into before you click the button. Mm-hmm. But I think it was in the Bellular video, actually, they discussed the fact that knowledge is not necessarily the issue with gambling. I don't think there are that many people who don't know that the house always wins.
Yeah, it's like, is smoking bad for you? Like I said earlier.
To what degree is signage going to change anyone's approach to this situation? But even that having been said, some of the regulatory boards enforcing the signage aren't even able to actually hit anyone with repercussions, because they're so underfunded, or they just don't have enough leeway or leverage in the system to actually make like actionable consequences for people who do not comply. So that's a huge issue as well. And then the other one was, as I was doing extra research, I was digging into like even AAA games that have an upfront cost but include some of these mechanics now are designed around the idea of putting microtransactions, which is, it's gross in a different way. It's not gambling. Loot boxes, borderline, definitely leaning towards gambling or overt gambling into their games. So it was a fascinating video by Extra Credits talking about the idea of actually designing a game consciously knowing that it could be repurposed for gambling, because there are actually a bunch of casinos now that have technically skill-based games like Guitar Hero that you can gamble on in the casino. Arcades, stuff like that, like actual real-world money sorts of places where you can gamble on performances in these situations. Mm-hmm. And that may have never been the intention of the developer, but it is something to consider very seriously when you're in the development process. Like, how can we build these systems to mitigate the risk of it being used for gambling? And obviously there's no way to do that 100%. Not necessarily, they're not necessarily even has to be, but it's something to be conscious of. And you just brought up all three of those points in one sentence, and I described them poorly in about 17. So no, that's just what you brought up reminded me of all that stuff. It's an interesting kind of web of concerns and issues.
Well, I think what's kind of funny that I'm now realizing, kind of synthesizing everything that you've said over the course of this loot box side, is that I think it's funny that the people that want to say, okay, loot boxes, it's not gambling because there's no real value behind the products that people are winning. One, way to shit on what you made. Like, way to just say what I made is not worth anything. It's not worth any tangible value. Like, what a way to just crap on yourself. So one, that's kind of funny. Two, the same people, cough, cough, Ubisoft, also want NFTs. NFTs have to have some kind of tangible value for them to actually make any sense to purchase. So if you're like being like, oh, haha, loot boxes and all of this stuff, it can't be gambling because there's no tangible value. NFTs have tangible value, everybody. Get your like, what? I just think it's so funny that there's these like two corporate interests that contradict each other so much, and they're just trying to push it. Like, we're getting a little bit at this point out of the gambling discussion, sort of, but like, what the heck? I don't understand.
No, it's wild to me because, like, in my opinion, like, I will never purchase an NFT because in my mind it has no value. I just don't care. Because to me personally, a JPEG of that NFT is worth exactly as much as the NFT. Maybe I'm missing out on a huge money-making opportunity, but, you know, screw me, I don't like killing the planet. And I like to believe in slightly more tangible sources of income. But I also think it's interesting as well that people, especially from, I would say like old school thoughts, like old school perspectives on stuff like this. Even I personally don't actually ascribe any particular tangible value to an NFT or to a Fortnite skin or a CSGO skin or fucking whatever. I still understand that there is value assigned to it, and assigned value is in many cases just as valuable as tangible value. So if you're going to say that someone couldn't sell Bitcoin for a shit ton of money because it has no tangible value, then you've clearly not been paying attention to anything that's been going on in the last decade or so. So yes, of course they have tangible value because that's the value we've assigned to them. So they do have tangible value. You can't get by with your definition of it as just being digital and therefore intangible as an excuse to, you know, just kind of run rampant and do whatever you want and get away with, you know, gambling and marketing gambling towards kids and everything like that. It whether or not the value is something you understand, there are a lot of people out there who do understand it and do really think that that value is legitimate, and therefore in that community it is. So yes, it absolutely has value.
Well, it kind of expands onto you remember when Facebook went to court and it was like really obvious that like Congress, it just did not understand how social media worked at all when they were like,
oh yeah, it was hysterical.
Yeah. This kind of like reminds me of all of that, of a little bit of people just being really ignorant to the youth culture or the culture of technology in general, and just not understanding that certain virtual products can have value. I mean, really what it is, right, is it's time. Time is money. Time is the tangible thing that has value that goes into these different things. You could either earn the item or you could spend time on it. And actually, I'm kind of going away from loot boxes a little bit, but loot boxes do, to a degree, share the same thing, because like in Overwatch, the first one, you could earn things or you could buy loot boxes for a chance to get things. So in that way, you're still potentially saving money. And I think a lot of the time loot boxes still, typically there's the whole earned component where you know exactly what you're getting, but it's going to take a long time versus the chance to get something. But anyway, I digress again. My whole point here is I just don't think that a lot of the politicians understand the reality of the situations that a lot of people are in. That's the positive way of looking at it. The negative way of looking at it is that they do understand what's going on and they just don't want to do anything because they're either, there's lobbyists in their pocket, or they're, making money on the side in some way, those kind of things. That's maybe the more like doomer side of it. But I think regardless, we've got to disconnect from, the reality of the situation and the way that a lot of politicians look at things.
Yeah. But I mean, like, I guess, like, not necessarily fully in summary, but I think it's hard to ignore that there is a gambling issue creeping its way ever more frequently and intensely into video games. And this is a whole other side tangent, but another video I watched was talking about how the transition from physical slot machines to video slot machines increased the probability of being able to explicitly design your machine around addictive tendencies, by giving you the I was so close fallacy, increasing the number of choices, and then having it be potentially connected to the internet and therefore manipulatable moment by moment, not necessarily to defraud somebody or, change a result, but to tweak the probability in favor of the house overall, or design an algorithm after a day and say, okay, well, we're gonna give them 4 close hits before they hit a jackpot, and maybe they'll never hit a jackpot, but we're gonna change the percentage of possibility. And it's like, yeah, that actually makes sense. Like, obviously the original ones were stacked against players because that's the whole point of the machine. Is it a Skinner box? Is that what that's called?
Well, I mean, it kind of works in that sense because you're saying that they're basically changing the cosmetic experience to psychologically manipulate people into thinking they're close to winning when they're maybe getting
even
down,
though it's
to give them hope.
It's still theoretically it's still random chance.
Yeah.
But it's also not random because it is random worked within a larger framework of very, very, very intensely calculated probabilities and algorithms. And, like, there's a bunch of stuff like that you can then put into, like, loot box drop rates for the more valuable items, more valuable skins, characters, what have you. And we really are entering into a period where, the gambling, because there was a long time where, either due to legal issues or not, the gambling segments of game companies like Konami needed to be completely separate from their video game division. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to sell the video games. So they'll go ahead and make pachinko machines till the day is done, and they'll make Metal Gear Solid. And those two things have to be in two separate companies, but we're seeing them meld in a way that is becoming more and more familiar to a lot of people, and that's kind of alarming because that complacency could lead to the stuff that we're talking about right now with all of the addictions, with it being, drip fed as a concept to children, with it being a pocket drainer for people with addictive tendencies, and none of it's necessarily being overtly regulated at the moment. It's at least being talked about, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on and really apply a critical eye to. Otherwise, you might be buying, an innocuous video game for your grandchild and find out that you've accidentally, given them the ability to drain their parents' bank account, which has happened.
Yeah.
I mean, those are outlier stories, and they make for good headlines, not necessarily great indicators of a trend, but those things do happen. And I think we just need to be kind of conscious of the whole melding of skill-based games and gambling and before they become one thing and we can't tell the goddamn difference anymore. And I think we're getting dangerously close to that point.
I think the last thing I'll say before I sign off on my side is that you hit on a few things, which is in video games in general, when it comes to microtransactions, everything is getting manipulated and really digging into human psychology to make it as appealing as possible for you to spend on something, whether that's in-game bundles popping up at the beginning that are like, oh, this will make your experience better, or after you die a few times offering you up things that'll make you stronger. All these different, those are just very simple examples. Like, it can go very deep into human psychology. And so even when we're not talking about gambling, I think this is a great opportunity to at least bring up that we are in a period where a lot of AAA games and a lot of these really big games that want you to spend money in-game are purposefully designing their systems to manipulate you and take advantage of you so that you spend money. And though that may not be technically gambling because you know what you're getting, it is certainly taking advantage of people in the way that Aaron was talking about, virtual slot machines taking advantage of people and ba-ba-da-ba-da. And the last thing I'll say is you hit on the whole parent note a little bit. And one of the common things here is to say, oh, well, the parents should keep, pay better attention to what their kids are doing or know what their kids are doing or da-da-da-da-da. And I think that parental responsibility certainly does play a role in this to a degree, but we certainly do not do enough to help parents know, in my opinion, what is available in games. Like, for example, the rated M, right? Like, my dad should know what goes into a rated M thing so that when I bought a rated M game, he's like, okay, I know roughly what my child is getting into, right? But there just aren't solid protections in place to help educate parents about these kind of things. Also, like, it's the age of the internet. So much new content's coming out. How is anyone supposed to keep up? And then you're like, well, people should know what's going on with their kids, even though everything's changing constantly. Like, I can barely keep up with what I'm doing, let alone if I had a kid, So it's so ridiculous. Like, when we give corporations so much power, like, why not also give them, with that power, the responsibility to, like, not screw people over and manipulate them, It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, I mean, like, I also feel like there are definitely moments where, even just to go back to, like, the comparison between, like, potentially age inappropriate content finding its way into the hands of kids. Very brief, very, very, very brief anecdote. My first job ever, I was a bagger at a grocery store chain. And I was talking with one of the cashiers who had two kids, or at least one kid, and the oldest one was like 10. And she was like, yeah, I just got him a PS3 for Christmas. Don't tell anybody, but it's going to be great. And I'm like, oh, sick. What games did you get to go with it? I'm thinking 10-year-old, right? And she goes, oh, well, I got him The Last of Us and GTA 5. And I went, do you know what's in those games? Actually? And she's like, no, I'd never heard of them. They were just, super popular, well-reviewed. And I was like, okay, cool. So The Last of Us is a harrowing story that begins with the brutal murder of a child, and GTA 5 is a Grand Theft Auto game where you can mercilessly beat hookers to death, just kind of for fun, and then outrun the police and there's no consequence. I think both of them are actually very good games, but maybe that's not what should be in a child's, eyes and hands at the tender age of 10. So, and again, this is not to equate the video game violence thing with anything, but it's like there should definitely be much more clear indications of what's in a game. And I think, like, the back of the box does a decent job, especially with M-rated games, saying, like, okay, this has got sexual content, nudity, violence, gore, blood, cursing, anything that a parent might find objectionable. But in-game transactions of any sort, and especially ones that are either on the borderline of being gambling or are explicitly gambling, should be clearly marked in a different box and absolutely should be known to parents purchasing a game for someone under the age of when they would be able to purchase it themselves.
Yeah.
Especially with that, because there is real world tangible impact to exposing kids to content like this, content like gambling, which you have to do with real money, or just the concept of gambling. That absolutely should be a factor, and it should be visible and noticeable to anyone purchasing the game. And again, not trying to yuck anyone's yums. If you want to gamble and you can do so responsibly, feel free to do so. I give you all the props in the world. I'm too much of a coward to gamble. I do not like losing very much. So knowing that I'm basically set up to lose is not an appealing like proposition to me in terms of gameplay. But yeah, I mean that you basically, I mean, you hit on all the points, but that's kind of illustrative, but not from the gambling side.
Yeah, I think before we hop into our thanks, the last thing I'll do is a quick shout out for those that are interested in learning more specifically about loot boxes as a form of gambling and some of the negative repercussions of that. I would highly advise that you check out the Gymquisition. We've referenced that show a few times. I was trying to find the specific deep dive episode where she goes into a lot of the details of people that have actually been really negatively affected. I could not find the episode name, but there are plenty of wonderful things over the course of the multitude of years that the Gymquisition's been running where you can find different content on it. So anyway, if you're interested in that, learning more, make sure to check that YouTube channel out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I will also shout out, there was a great article on gamesindustry.biz where a researcher kind of discusses what would be good, actionable moves to make in terms of self-regulating as a first step the gambling in video games. And that's so it's a very interesting read. I'll put that one down in the show notes just so I don't have to try to pronounce the extremely good writer's name. I think it's Leon, either Y, because I'm guessing there's a period after that, so I'm guessing that's an initial, and then Zhao, I think, would be the right pronunciation. But it's a very recent article, and it's very insightful and very well thought out, methodical sort of way. So that about does it for me, I guess. Did you have anything else, Zachary?
Nah, we all good.
I got one thing, and I'm just going to say it because it's going to date the episode, but Stadia is dead.
I did hear that Stadia is dead. I didn't do any research into it because I just didn't care at all. But unsurprisingly, it's gone. So
I did do some research into it, and we will give no more than 25 more seconds to this, but I was mostly doing research into it because it came A, the fuck out of nowhere. B, I found out they were offering refunds, and I purchased at least one game on Stadia as well as the Founders Edition of the actual like system itself, like the platform.
Yeah.
So I'm entitled to a refund for all of that. So clean $180 coming my way.
Oh, dope.
Sounds pretty neat.
Dope.
Betwixt my, I mean, I'm gonna lose all my Destiny progress, but I haven't played on Stadia.
No, you won't. It's cross save, or it's you're fine.
I don't care.
Well, I mean,
I
if
wasn't
you did
that invested
care.
in my character anyhow. No, I enjoyed playing the game a lot, but it wasn't a big deal. But yeah, no, I was like, man, way to go, Google. You had probably the best chance just based on infrastructure to make something revolutionary happen, and you managed to really fuck it. And the most interesting part of that is just that apparently there were some developers and like employees who were also surprised by it based on a report by Kotaku. So also real cool, Google, real cool. You've lived up to your reputation of making hardware you do not have any intention of supporting. Congratulations.
Whee!
Huzzah!
And I'll say also, we have a whole episode deep diving into a lot of those cloud gaming things. I can't remember the episode number. It's not important. We don't have that many. You'll be able to find it.
It has something to do with Stadia's empty stadium.
Yeah.
Is in the
it
title.
has Stadia in the title, so you should be able to find it. But on that note, but on a positive note, I would like to thank eDougie Art for our wonderful logo. album cover, podcast art. We absolutely adore E. art. She is amazing and super helpful. Make sure to check her out under the same name on either Etsy or on Instagram.
Yes, please do that. And I would give a similar endorsement to, of course, the one and only Beach Girl. They are an incredible indie artist. They wrote our music, which we use for both of our intro and outro. And they've got a bunch of stuff that is, it's got vocals. Some of it doesn't have vocals. Some of it's very upbeat. Some of it's a little bit more introspective. But you will not regret checking out Beach Girl. And you can find them at Bandcamp, SoundCloud, Spotify, or just about anywhere else you would find digital music. So check them out again. That is, of course, a Beach Girl.
All right. And with that, thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully you had fun. We sure did. And we'll talk to you later.
It was a very clean exit, and I shall attempt to do the same as I slowly fade into the ether. Thank you all so much for listening. Goodbye.
Did you know smoking's bad for you?